thumbs down for Javier Baez and the Mets that they're getting back at their fans, Chip. I don't know whether you saw that.
I didn't.
Oh, it's a big storm in New York of a different side, where the players are getting back at the fans for booing them.
Oh, I'll have to take a look at that one. All right, good stuff. I mean, when you find out a day late that your team was in a game in which there were 30 runs scored, and you find out a day late, yeah, maybe I've kind of lost interest in this season. I don't know. All right, let's get to what you learned last week, Jim, because there was and I want to start with the meeting out in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and the comments from Federal Reserve Board Chairman Jerome Powell. What is he signaling is going to happen?
Well, as is usual with Chairman Powell, he gave something to everyone. And I wrote, taper time is on the way, perhaps, because he acknowledged inflation was rising faster than he thought, but yet he quickly went back and said he and others still think it's transitory. The second caveat, Chip, he mentioned the labor market. Hiring is strong, but it could be better, he said. There's your offset. And he mentioned COVID-19, that the Delta variant may or may not be an economic problem. So that means he wants more data, and he's going to get the initial ones Friday, Chip, with the jobs report.
Right. That's obviously is going to be the next really key piece of information that we're going to get as far as taking the temperature of just how the economy is doing.
Yeah, bottom line, Chip, private analysts look for a Fed announcement in November that the process of tapering will begin in December. And once that starts, Goldman Sachs sees reductions of about $15 billion per FOMC meeting, which would take 8 months to complete.
Okay. 8 months to complete it. So far, the equities markets have taken it they've kind of taken it in stride, Jim. I was surprised that we didn't see more of a cautionary sell-off at the end of last week.
Yeah, well, the Jackson Hole, even though it was virtual, that time frame usually in the recent past is when we've had some bombshell announcements.
Yeah.
And I guess that they breathed a sigh of relief that there was enough wiggle room for all sides to be happy with what he said.
Interesting. Okay. Another headline that you've got out this morning, we talked about it briefly on Friday, and that is the WOTUS redo. What's going on there?
Yeah, well, they've been having meetings. We said Friday that the Republican lawmakers have asked for a 60-day extension of the comment period, and usually they give them that because Washington loves to extend the time frames. Yeah. But they've been holding virtual stakeholder meetings, and they had 100, more than 100 participants at each one, and so that means only 20 to 30 had time to speak for about 3 minutes each, I think. Yeah. But one thing was crystal clear out of those meetings so far, Chip, from the ag stakeholders and home builders and other businesses impacted by the rule. They recommended keeping the current what's called navigable waters protection rule, but EPA kind of wants to add some more regulatory language to that. So, that's the issue there. And of course, the strident environmentalists want to really go back to the old WOTUS rule.
Right. We're not going to do that, are we?
No, absolutely not. EPA, much like on the RFS, Chip, they want to have a win-win, whatever that is. So it looks we're into that era right now that nobody's happy.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. I want to save Afghanistan for the week ahead.
Sure.
We could spend a lot of time talking about it in the rearview mirror, but I want to save that for the week ahead. Let's go ahead and jump to the weekend. And this headline from your update over the weekend, Jim, it just kind of blows me away. It's the real price tag on the social infrastructure. It's not $3.5 trillion. No. It's much bigger.
Yes, it's $5 trillion or higher, Chip. And that's from a pretty good group. The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. They do good work, and they're saying the alleged $3.5 trillion dollar outline would really cost $5 trillion to $5.5 trillion when adjusting for the accounting gimmicks. Both political parties do that, but I think that is indeed the full cost, and that's why Bernie Sanders, Chip, won't probably cry too much privately with his Democratic colleagues when it goes down from the $3.5 trillion level.
Right. That's an excellent point. He's getting more of what he asked for all the time, is what it looks like.
Yes.
Yeah. So, all right.
And I noted in the Afghanistan, one little thing before, I know we're going to talk about that later, but the Democrats are saying, they're raising the odds now, Chip, of an eventual two-prong approval of infrastructure because of the way the Afghanistan withdrawal, some people call it an evacuation now, not a withdrawal, because they have to show American voters that they can do something. So that's actually increasing the odds that we're going to get a successful vote. And I'm probably in that camp, Chip.
Okay. All right. Okay. On Friday's free-for-all on AgriTalk, Friday morning, we had what has been described to me as a brave segment, where we spent a lot of time talking about the Delta variant of COVID-19 and vaccinations, whether or not they should be mandated. Any thoughts on that over the weekend, Jim?
I've had a revision. I think the mark of a successful person, Chip, is the ability to change, to announce maybe when you're wrong. I hate that word, wrong, but some of in my family in the Missouri, Illinois area, and some emails that I got made me do a lot of research on the weekend relative to not only just mandates. I still believe a mandate is viable, but with the change, it has to do with natural immunity. I have read enough, Chip, that if you've had COVID in the past, you have more antibodies than when you get the vaccine.
Sure.
So there's several reasons there. If you've had COVID, I'm not so sure that you should have even got those vaccine shots from my research. And two, you definitely, I don't think, need the boosters. Now, again, that's just from my research. And as far as the mandates, I don't think you can simply just mandate that you've had to show that you've had the vaccines, because if you have the natural immunities, you're better off anyway. Now, I'm not saying go out and get COVID, okay?
Right.
But if you can prove that you've had COVID and maybe show, I know there's a test, I think, for the antibodies. I know my nieces and nephews had it, and they're at 9 or 1.0 or whatever. Apparently that's high. So I've adjusted, Chip, on that one. I don't think you can have just a blanket mandate to show the vaccines, because of all the people who've had COVID-19 have higher immunities to ward off.
Right. Excellent. And that was something that we didn't even talk about. Whether or not you've had it, should you then be required to have your vaccine passport to get into a sporting event or to get into a restaurant or even to get on a plane? If you've already had it, you're better protected than those of us that hadn't had it and have had the vaccine.
Yeah. Now, you still, most people say you should still wear a mask under certain situations, because you can still give it to others. So, I can go both ways on that one. But again, I spent a lot of time, doing the research, and so I've changed. And this is why my brother-in-law, who got sick, long COVID, if you will, after the second shot, he had COVID. So, looking back, I don't think he should have had the vaccine shot. I think he would have been better off and not had long COVID right now. Now, that's not going to affect everybody the same way, but this is just me
Right.
after reading the research. And now over the weekend, Chip, we've had Biden put out that he may want to have the booster at 5 months now after your second shot. But now there's an article that we put in Pro Farmer on the New York Times that questions whether or not you even need one at 8 months. And that's what the current recommendation is. The FDA is the final say on this one, because they're quoting some researchers who say the Israeli study that it was based on was somewhat flawed. And so now we got murkiness, regarding the boosters.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I feel compelled every time we have this conversation to say, of course, consult with your doctor, consult with your medical professional, someone that you trust in the medical field, before making any decisions around COVID. Don't be listening to me and him on this. Consult with your medical. But Jim, I think it's important to have the conversation because it does give you some, and it does give some listeners some questions to ask that may make you feel better about getting the shot. So
yes, and as I talked to my doctor, I said, this is what I did over the weekend, and so he didn't rule out me not getting a booster, Chip. So, but at least I talked to him.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go to the weekend and go over to Afghanistan and all the happenings there. First, Jim, before we get into it, just a reminder to everyone that you can be part of the conversation. There's the comments tab on the right side of the screen. Click on that. You can enter your comments, question, be part of the conversation. We love it when we get the real-time questions in here for Jim to answer. Afghanistan, we are now within 24 hours of the deadline to get out. Jim, what's the status?
Well, it began Saturday, and the White House announced the U.S. has the capacity to evacuate the remaining Americans. Now, they said that's approximately 300 U.S. citizens remaining in Afghanistan who want to leave before Biden's Tuesday deadline, and they announced that, Sunday. And also over the weekend, we saw alerted strikes. They struck a vehicle in Kabul that posed an imminent threat. So that continues. And you saw an announcement that the U.S. joined 97 other countries that pledged to evacuate Afghan allies after the deadline. So we did have a lot of weekend developments, Jeff.
Yeah. I find it interesting that the people that you're having conversations with are saying that Afghanistan may actually increase the odds of an infrastructure package, because it just feels to me that this is going to be a huge distraction and will dominate lawmakers' time for weeks.
Well, some say part of the initial problem with Biden's withdrawal strategy was he was too focused on the domestic side and wanted to pell-mell go to those infrastructure packages. So, but now to drop the ball on the votes, Chip, would just be too much for the Democrats who are seeing their internal polls are showing what some of the public polls are showing, that Biden and the Democrats are sinking right now. So they need a diversion, if you will. And spending a lot of money is a favorite diversion from both political parties in this town.
As far as the rating, the approval ratings go, it's very early. We could get to this time next year in front of the 2022 elections, and if people might forget all about what is happening right now, Jim.
Yeah, but I've seen the network news that I've had the stomach to watch. A number of the commentators have said, it's an insult to the 13 families who lost military people to say that it's going to be forgotten, come election time. This one gripped a lot of people, Chip, and I think it's going to have, some legs to it, if you will. And McConnell, the minority leader in the Senate, Mitch McConnell, Republican from Kentucky, said the withdrawal is one of the worst American foreign policy decisions in our history. So that drumbeat is going to continue.
Yeah. Well, you will continue to beat the drum. I'll continue to beat that drum. But mainstream media, depending on how they see how they're reading the tea leaves, it could be a convenient, emission, or they just might not bring it up anymore, Jim.
True. That's true.
Yeah. So it's something that we're going to have to watch going forward. That is absolutely the truth. Where do you think we go from here?
On Afghanistan?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, see, what's going to have some shelf life, Chip, is after this is not, quote, over, that's not the right word, you're going to have congressional hearings on what went wrong. And you're probably I'll be shocked if there's not resignations on the part of some people in the Biden administration. You already have some of the intelligence and other people, talking to reporters saying, well, we may have gone along with the Biden strategy, but we were forced to, or something to that degree. So hearings are going to keep this topic front and center, Chip, in the months ahead. As well it should.
Yes, absolutely. What are you doing this week with both the House and the Senate out? I mean, is there going to be any progress on the infrastructure?
Oh, they're working behind the scenes. The energy people, the energy committees. This is where actually the hard work is done, Chip. So those people remaining in this town, a lot of them have left for necessary vacations with their families. But this is where the language is being written. So my work actually increases, Chip, because I want to get drafts of the language, because that's going to be the bread and butter of what they're going to vote on. Right.
Okay. One of your subheads in your weekend update, recall the ag panels have an instruction to increase spending by $135 billion over the next 10 years. What is that about?
Well, that's big push for conservation, and the Republicans on the panel have said they want to be part of the process, but I don't see any movement to that degree. So you're going to have up to $50 billion more in conservation program spending. There'll probably always be other stuff for nutrition, spending, Chip, and other aspects. And, that's equivalent to what we spend in the Farm Bill on two major titles, Title I and Title II. So it's a lot of money, Chip. And that's why this is like a mini Farm Bill, that additional funding. And I do hope they open ideas to the Republicans, but the Republicans on the ag committees are saying they're not being consulted right now.
Okay. Speaking of ag spending, we need to go back to last week because there was movement on the CFAP payments.
Yeah, more and more, not all, but some contract hog producers got it, not the cattle. Contract.
Iowa cattlemen are a little upset about that. I found that out over the weekend.
Yeah, and I'm not getting any feedback on my calls. I think people are so confused, Chip, of what's been out there, what's pending, and I'm going to try to come up with the table to say what's already been announced versus what is still pending. Now, again, to be fair to USDA, a number of these things have had to have new regulation language written. And that's why it took, I think, so long for the contract hog producers to come out. But why not livestock industry? So I still haven't got a viable response to that. And on dairy, we had the dairy donation program funding, but we have millions of dollars still left to for the promised dairy aid to come out. So we're not done with the money spigot yet.
Yeah. No, I'm sure we're not. And speaking of spigots, what's this about water futures?
There's stories today which I love. I called water futures are so hot they're boiling. Okay, right now, and that's a big one. You go out to California, and I think they started the water trading.
Yeah,
And that's led to the spike in the state's water prices. They nearly doubled the value of futures contracts for water. The Barron's, weekly, magazine, if you will, has a big story on it. And they said the California Water Index, climbed to about 87% year to date to what they call $923.54 per 1 acre foot. And that'll make your eyes glaze over. So I have a definition on profarmer.com. And on the CME, water futures based on that index climbed 90% this year to $942 per 1 acre foot. You said a year or so ago to watch water futures, and that's, if you would have bought that day, Chip, you'd have a lot of money in your pocket.
Yeah. Yeah. The whole concept really started in Australia. And one of our friends was at the very beginning of the development of
Is that Morrison?
Morrison. Yeah, Kim Morrison.
Yep.
So he's kept me up to speed on some of the developments there, and he even consulted with the development of water futures here. So it's something that obviously we are going to be paying very close attention to.
And we have a bull market in Afghanistan for raw opium. $200 is the price of a kilogram, that small amount of raw opium in Afghanistan, up from $70, Chip. Why? The Taliban ordered a stop to its production. So they want to. They're seeking international acceptance of their new rulers.
Right.
So now you've got a bull market in opium.
Crazy. That's a supply side issue that's driven by unfortunate demand.
Huge demand.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the more interesting items that I saw in Pro Farmer last week, Jim, was, and we talked about it a little bit on Friday in the free for all, is China and their appetite for farm goods, and how it looks like phase one, or year 2 of phase 1, is going to be very successful.
Oh, it should be. Yeah. Look, we have a chart that I think it was John Newton on the Senate Ag Committee. He's the top economist for the Republicans. We have it in profarmer.com, and it is impressive, Chip. It shows year to date. Now, this is on a calendar year basis. We're well ahead of year 1 on phase 1. Right. Now, we're not at those maximum levels, and we didn't hit it for the first year, but it got it didn't get a quick start, if you recall, on that one. So if you go to the actual chart, I'm looking at it right now. U.S.-China ag exports 2020 and 2021. The 21 exports are 110% above the 2020's export value. It's impressive, Chip, no matter how you look at it. It's impressive. And it shows China's appetite continues. And we saw a lot of naysayers on this, that this could probably be only a 1 or 2 year phenomenon. But as you've discussed on AgriTalk, their need for commodities, whether it be corn and of course soybeans. We had another daily sale again this morning. It's going to continue.
Yeah. One last thing on the export side of things. Ethanol is now an ag export, not an energy export, correct?
Yes. And that's more realistic. That's really the WTO, World Trade Organization, definition of ag trade. And I think it makes a lot of sense. But when USDA put out their report late last week, it showed we were in an ag trade deficit for the prior 2 years, Chip, but that's the way it is. I think it's a far better accounting right now.
Okay. All right. We did a crash course in learning about renewable diesel last week on AgriTalk, Jim. We had 4 or 5 fascinating conversations, and we're going to continue it this week. But boy, we learned a lot about it last week, and as we've talked about on Signal to Noise, the momentum is clearly on the side of renewable diesel.
No ifs, ands, or buts, and this is parlayed into the coming climate change requirements for the industry and the movement of the biofuel proponents to say the ethanol and biodiesel are plant-based products. And so the rebranding has already begun, Chip, and I think it's much needed.
Yeah, and we talked a little bit last week about the Next Gen Fuels Act. That was with Gary Niemeyer on our Farmer Forum. He's a big supporter of that piece of on that proposal.
Farmer corn grower president.
That's right.
Yes.
And he is very excited that the automakers seem to be paying attention now to that development. And not only are we talking about the next gen of fuel, we're also talking about the next gen of engines and motors. There may be some progress to be had on this as well.
I do want to alert, Chip, I'm watching, one of the things I'm watching for in this either budget reconciliation or some other must-pass bill by the end of the year, both sides in the renewable fuel standard debate want to get their language in that document. That usually means neither side will get it, but I can't rule it out. So that's something to watch out for, whether it's a mandatory year-round E15, I think, that thrust is being pushed by Ernst and others in Iowa and other states, but also the fuel industry wants some of their language. So that's really an alert that watch out for potential language.
Okay. Speaking of Ernst, we've got Senator Ernst on the show this morning. So I'm looking forward to that.
Ask her about that. Yeah, ask her about that. Yeah,
I will. And we will obviously also get her perspectives on what's happening in Afghanistan and with the infrastructure packages. Okay, you wanted to do a shout out, Jim.
Oh my goodness, my good friend, Dr. we call him Steve Verrett, long time head of the Plains Cotton group. He recently retired. Now, I think he's staying on a little bit longer for consulting, but he's getting some testimonials, and I linked to one of them in today's policy updates on profarmer.com. I cannot speak more highly of Steve Verrett. He's Mr. Cotton, and if I ever had a cotton policy question, a crop question, he was in Lubbock, and he took NAS on a couple years ago, maybe it was last year, and he was right as far as their crop estimate. So increasingly we're losing some pretty good veterans in the ag sector, but he is so good that he mentored a number of people at Plains Cotton who I know. And so I want to give a tip of the hat to my good friend, Steve Verrett.
Excellent. Good work. We are coming up on Labor Day weekend. I can't believe that here we are at the end of summer. But we're coming up on Labor Day weekend. That means that, of course, next week, Signal to Noise will be coming at you on Tuesday morning. That is, if we can recover quick enough from a 3-day weekend, Jim.
Absolutely. And lastly, Chip, I did want to point out that I read a lot of papers, and the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel had one that caught my eye real briefly. The school board in a Milwaukee suburb opted out of a USDA program allowing free meals for all students this year, with one board member saying families may become, quote, spoiled.
Well, I don't know if that's a breath of fresh air or if that's you better be careful.
Yeah. He could be defeated on that alone.
That's right. That's right. My goodness. All right. Thank you so much for tuning in. As I said, we've got Senator Ernst coming up here in just a little bit. And of course, conversation with Greg Peterson, Machinery Pete as well. Keep watching for those signals out there. Have a great week.